Hello, I'm Lynley Crosswell, CEO of Museums Victoria. Our museums have an important role to play in providing a platform for open, informed, and evidence-based discussion on some of the most relevant issues facing us today. Today's conversation focuses on the new research and traditional knowledge being applied in innovative ways across our economy to create more sustainable outcomes for the environment and for biodiversity. It's an inspiring conversation with our very passionate panellists.
Museums Victoria respectfully acknowledges the traditional owners of the lands where we work, the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and First Peoples language groups and communities across Victoria and Australia. We pay our respects to their elders past, present, and their emerging leaders. Our organisation, in partnership with the First Peoples of Victoria, is working to place First Peoples living cultures and histories at the core of our practice.
Now, we're talking today about the topic of Towards a Thriving Future, transformative thinking for the environment. And I thought a great place to start, given the interesting stories we have of the panellists, is to understand your personal motivations and what got you passionate about the climate, the environment, the role that each of you play in the sustainability agenda. So Josh, I'm going to come to you first. I mean, a fascinating backstory to know that at age 9, you decided to devote your career to sustainable agriculture. Can you tell us a little bit about why it was at age 9 you went, this is something I need to do?
I was definitely, of course, thanks for having me here. But to say that at age 9, I was planning out a career in sustainable agriculture, this is something that has happened as my love of ethics has come through. As a human being, I find it incredibly important to treat the people around me and everything I deal with a great deal of respect. So when I started the business back over 10 years ago now, I wasn't thinking about that. I was just doing what I thought was right. And then as the business has expanded, it's continuing to make those decisions that positively affect those who do business with us, under the influence of us, for example, our animals and our staff, and continuing to do right by whoever deal with us.
So why chicken and why eggs? How did that start?
So we had a farm. So this is obviously my parents' place. And when I was 9, I wanted pocket money to buy some toy. I think it was Lego. And they're like, you know what? How about you go make some money? How about you go do something? And so we had chickens, and as you could imagine, you can sell eggs reasonably easily. So I packed them up and I started selling them to neighbors. And from there, I grew through farmers markets. And then from farmers markets, I met a manager of a grocery store and got into her store. And then from there, my expansion kind of grew. In 2014, my mother and I kind of became business partners and then decided to take it a little bit more seriously, and met with Coles and Woolies that year. And since then, we've added 70 Coles and Woolies stores, and we have 20,000 chickens now.
Bianca, if I can come to you, you've for a long time been inspired by nature in your designs, and your business has also made a carbon neutral pledge too. What for you, what landed, I guess, or resonated in terms of the environment becoming a passion for you and thinking about the sustainable fashion agenda and the role your business could play in it?
I have to start with, I've always just found, I suppose, my heart caught in nature. There's a way that whenever I would go to be unsettled, I would go and watch the ocean, and I would go for a bushwalk, and I would swim in the sea. And I think that it has informed and inspired many of my collections. And when I was moving through that, I thought, well, I'm explaining how beautiful nature is in my work, but I'm not making sure that I'm preserving the nature that is so inspiring for my work. And so it was this holistic approach of really trying to connect what inspires you to it being a pillar of how you engage with your environment and the decisions that you make in your business. And so what that looked like in a story, it started with first making all of my clothes in Sydney, so that I could be close to my makers and I could react to the market so that I could have the lowest amount of waste ever possible. So cutting quite small runs and just seeing how they go, and not building fat into it, just being really dynamic. And then when I saw how that really allowed you to find these ways to make things work, I started looking at the next level, which is fabrics, which are a huge part of the carbon footprint of fashion. And so I started using dead stock fabric, and I realized that it was a bit too hit and miss. Sometimes you use dead stock, sometimes you didn't. So I decided to make a commitment of using 50% dead stock. And sorry, dead stock fabric is remnant fabric. So someone else has produced it.
I was about to ask you.
Yeah, another company or something like that. And it really, and I start only with those fabrics, so that you, rather than going, oh, does this piece of the puzzle meet? You're like, well, this is my frame. This is my puzzle. This is what I am talking to. And so then you build your story around that. And when you do that, what you can do with the fabric and how much fabric it can be is just limitless. The last part of was thinking more about, well, where's it in a bigger section? What does it look like in carbon neutral, and how can we make a bigger impact? So the last 12 months has been a carbon neutral journey, which I'm very excited about, not just to be carbon neutral, but it's all about the idea of tracing really where can you improve? Because if you're not tracking it, you can't do better at it. So I think that will lead us into a totally interesting world of science and nature and all of the components that go into fashion, and how can you unpack them to, preserve the environment that we love and live in every day.
Vicky, I want to come to you if we can. How do you jump from a PhD in physics to ending up in hydrogen? And can you explain to all of us why we're talking about hydrogen so much at the moment, and what this green hydrogen conversation means too?
Sure, thanks, Holly. So I guess the first part of that question there about how I jumped, well, it was a bit of a zigzagging route, as most things are. But for me, what really drove me to kind of go away from the path of academia was that real strong desire to see the flow on impact from the work that we do. So how the work in a laboratory then translates to the end user and to kind of broader community benefits. And I found that I'm really interested in people's stories. I'm interested in their motivations, but I also feel that there is a role that I can play in helping to translate, in helping to bring people together, because fundamentally, I feel that we can create so much more, like bigger, better together. And if we just connect the right people together with what they're trying to solve, with the ideas that we have, we can create amazing things together. So that's the story behind that. And then coming over to hydrogen, it's an element that is in great abundance. It's been, known, the properties of it have been known for, the potential of it really has been known for half a century to help provide, a potentially cleaner source of energy. But the real problem with it is that in its natural form, it doesn't exist as a single element. So you need to apply energy in order to split it out so that you can have hydrogen outside of water, for example. But in that process, in the splitting and the reforming process, you either apply energy or you'll have energy generated from it. And that is what we can capture here with hydrogen. And now that, traditionally we have been using hydrogen in ammonia, for example, in fertilizers, but we've been using fossil fuel pathways to split that, to get that hydrogen out. And that's not going to be really helpful, even though, the combination of it, you have water as a byproduct. But if you're using fossil fuels to split it in the first place, that's not helping you in your decarbonisation goals. And with the reduction in price of renewables these days, you're really starting to see the cost competitiveness of using a sustainable energy source to provide that energy to do the splitting. And then when you're reforming, you're going to have a carbon-free possibility here as an alternative to our fossil fuels.
Maddie, if we can come to you, you've got such an interesting background, archaeology, research, you're creative. I want to understand a little bit about the intersection between your passion for country and your passion for climate change. Can you talk to us about that?
When I was a little kid, I grew up in a small town called Kinglake West, just north of Melbourne. And we had this really large property that was bordered by the national park. And my brother and I would, always be out there in the bush, discovering things. And I think that was sort of my pushed to why did I want to become an archaeologist. I always knew I wanted to work outside and I wanted to work in culture. And then when I was doing year 12, Black Saturday hit and it affected our town quite severely. And the property that we grew up in and that my brother and I knew every inch of, and that national park that we'd explored was completely gone. Every blade of grass, every leaf was no more. And so that for me, was really climate change or the impacts of humans on the environment. That was like right there in front of our faces. And so, I went off and I did my archaeology degree and worked in government for a long time. And what was really interesting to me was the importance of the past in informing the future and informing the present. My cultural learnings and what archaeology and science tells us is that my ancestors lived in a way in which they nurtured country and they cared for country. And at the moment, our cities and the places that we live don't do that. And thinking about what is going to happen in the face of climate change and what's already happened, the devastation that communities in Australia and particularly in the Pacific have felt through the effects of climate change. What are the lessons that country can tell us, and what are the lessons that our ancestors can tell us about more sustainable living?
I love that. That piece around past informing the present. I was just going to ask you, can you tell us a little bit more about the research you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, so I think my research is looking at Indigenous knowledges and scientific knowledges and ways in which to bring them together. Indigenous knowledges for me are a science. It's about careful observation over tens of thousands of years of place. And the way in which my ancestors have kept that knowledge and retained that knowledge is through storytelling. We have stories that are 30,000 years old. And when you hear them told, it's like, oh, is that is that a story that your dad, like from your dad's time or from your grandfather's time? But, it's a 30,000-year-old story. In Victoria, we have Budge Bim, which was recently added to the World Heritage List. And that's a Gunditjmara story of a volcano that happened over 30,000 years ago. We have stories in Melbourne, in Nam, of the filling of the bay and what happens with sea level rise. And so these scientific knowledges are held through stories. And my research is looking at ways in which stories can bring together non-Indigenous knowledges or traditional science and Indigenous knowledges so that we can tell these stories of place and understand how our knowledges can inform the future.
Thank you all so much. It's such an interesting backstory to kind of the conversation that we're going to have. Bianca, I want to come to you if I can. The entire fashion industry model now seems to be fast fashion. And, preparing for this conversation, and I did some research, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation estimates that we throw away a truckload of textiles every second. Each of us throws away 30 kilograms of clothing every day. And then also just even some of the fabrics, cotton takes extraordinarily 7,000 to 29,000 litres to produce 1 kilogram, for example. It's quite remarkable. I guess I wanted to ask you, firstly, how difficult has it been to become an environmentally conscious fashion label? And what advice, I guess, have you got for individuals who are thinking about how to try and be more conscious when it comes to their fashion choices?
In terms of how difficult it is, I think the great thing is about fashion is that it changes. So it's not a static product and it can always evolve. And I think where that helps us is it's not like, say you're making something and it uses aluminium and you can't possibly, if it's really carbon heavy, you can't possibly use another material for it. So there is flexibilities that with the learnings, I think we're learning every month about fabrics, and some are great in how they're renewable and they biodegrade, but they're terrible in how much water they take per kilo of them. And there's so much complexity. Some have lower carbon footprints, obviously man-made fibers, but they don't degrade. So I think you really have to think of what is your first pillar. My partner who's environmentalist said you can't be everything to everyone in the environment or you just won't make a move. So what is the first move you're going to make? And then once you get to somewhere you like with that, then you can think about other things. So for me, it was definitely starting with my carbon footprint. I feel there are lots of things we want, but more than anything, we want an inhabitable planet for future generations to keep our biodiversity and, our natural environment. So starting with that, fabrics just had to be the first thing on the list. And a big metaphor for me is often thinking, well, how did our grandparents live? When we look at the figures on how much we use and how much we dispose of, that was never a problem for them. And I think there were ideas around investing in a few really beautiful things and making them last. That didn't mean you were in activewear every day. It meant you wore beautiful silk dresses and lovely pleated wool skirts. But, I might have my grandmothers, or someone else might have their grandmothers, because they were cared for, they were repaired, they were washed, and we all had that you didn't just sit any way you wanted. You I don't know, you valued them, and the years of growing all of the cotton or the wool or whatever that went into it, and the hours of the craft that went into it, because you usually knew the dressmaker. And I think that that's probably one of the biggest problems with fashion is our distance, both as designers, from what's getting made and where it's getting made. And when there's waste, you're not physically seeing it. Like, put yourself close to everything that you can, because then you will physically, like, if you look around, you'll be like, oh, I can't do this. Let's see this bin fill up with these bits of waste that are too big. I have to think of a design that can fit and use these bits of waste. Or I can't see these racks of clothes that happen at the end of sale. We have to work out how to have a more evergreen part of our collection. So I think you really have to stay connected, and I think the customer has to stay connected to what, look at your wardrobe, look at what you wear, look at what you invest into.
Josh, I want to come to your standpoint as well. I've found it very fascinating doing research on free-range eggs and just realizing what an incredibly broad church that is in terms of the different rules, that how many hens per hectare and things like that. I want to ask you about that. What role do standards and regulation actually play in supporting ethical and environmentally friendly production?
As with all things, measuring simply only by the numbers is not going to tell the whole story. And I believe that to be most true with free-range chickens. Chickens naturally don't go very far from their home, right? If you give a chicken, if you give 10,000 chickens 10 acres, they're going to use 2 acres. And the problem is if you always have chickens there, always cycling through, and the 10,000 chickens are only using those 2 acres, and it becomes dirt, and then there's no point. Why bother, right? Just call it what it is. Say they have 2 acres and get on with your life, because you're not doing anything for them. So part of what makes us sustainable, and it's been a really honestly very expensive part of our journey, is our sheds are, we've built these enormous, they're basically like standard agriculture chicken sheds, except we put them on metal skids and we drag them using bulldozers. So every 2 months, the chicken shed will move 100 meters down the paddock onto new grass, onto new land, and will not only allow the chickens access to grass and worms and all the things that the free range people are saying, that we tell our customers that they're getting, but we also reduce our impact on the land, our footprint. Because if you leave chickens in a spot for a while, their manure is toxic. They eat everything. It's not good for the land to be, overtaxed, of course.
Absolutely. Now, when we've spoken before, you talked about sort of this tension that exists in running and scaling an ethical business. Can you talk to us a bit about that?
Yes, as we've grown, we've had to find ways to use our scale to, get cheaper feed, or, get better sheds. So we have to employ, less man hours to look after the chickens. We've had to find what we did when we were planning to expand is we decided what our core pillars were. And we're like, we're going to expand, but we're not going to touch these core issues. So for us, that was the sheds moving, the chickens being able to go outside, and the nutrition, which was very important. It also happens to be expensive. to grow as a company, we locked these core tenets in, the things that we believe are important, and then we've had to evaluate everything around that to ensure that as we expand as a company, we're still making good business decisions, whilst also respecting what we've already committed to.
One of the things that strikes me about what Josh and Bianca have both touched on there is this sort of education process, both for yourself as a business owner, in terms of challenging yourself to continuously improve and think about your methods of production, as much as there's a journey you're sort of taking your consumers and the community and even, people in your supply chain on. And both of you, I know, are passionate about the engagement and the storytelling piece. So Vicky, I might come to you first. How important is this communication role, and any lessons on effective communication in terms of bringing people on the journey when it comes to climate and sustainability?
If you just hear the stories coming from Bianca and from Josh there about, what are all the considerations that have come to you being able to purchase those eggs, or you being able to purchase that garment, and knowing that story, you may make a choice between, it's not just about cost anymore. And I think it's a very similar thing with research. I mean, there is so much amazing work that is being done, but if you don't have a way to communicate how that impacts people's lives, or how that can change people's lives, if you don't have a way of also feeding back to someone who is researching, what could this mean for someone that you don't speak to on a day-to-day basis? Would you change the way you go about that research? Would you think about how you can apply it to a different application that was not your original intent?
Maddie, Vicky said there, when we know stories, we empower people to be able to make a different choice. I know you're passionate about storytelling. Can you tell us a little bit about what makes a good story? What's a story that's going to get people to think differently about their decision-making?
Yeah, I mean, as humans, we are sort of hardwired to love stories, movies, music, books, whatever it is. We love to hear stories, and thinking about the sort of period that we're in now of misinformation and of distrust in research or in government. What is the power of stories to communicate information, I think, is really important. And part of that is that people like stories that they can relate to, that they feel emotional connection to, which is, why sometimes, when Vicky was talking about hydrogen, that seems quite a concept that might be hard to connect to, because it's something that happens sort of outside of your sphere of knowing. But in fact, when she sort of breaks it down and she talks about it, you can kind of start to understand, oh, that's in water. And so, it's about creating these moments of connection. And stories can be really beautiful and poignant, and they can move you to action, and they can move you to emotion, and they can also gently nudge your behavior into, when you are doing something, remembering what that is. Even Josh, talking about his chickens, that was a story. And, that's something that, will stay with all of us, is thinking about, just that impact that he was talking about, moving his chooks along so that it's not impacting on country. And so I think, those sorts of things is really important to just think about.
I'm going to come to audience questions in a second, but I want to ask you one more thing, Maddie. When we spoke last week, you mentioned something that really hit me in a way that I hadn't thought about it before. Your notion that welcome to country as part of our storytelling has a role in calling all of us to action. Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah, so a welcome to country is a ceremony that's performed by traditional owners to welcome visitors to the resources of their lands. So if you've ever been welcomed to country, I'm just thinking of, particularly on Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri country, where Museums Victoria is located. Often people like Auntie Di or Auntie Joy or Auntie Caroline will say things like, whilst you're on Wurundjeri or Boonwurrung country, you're most welcome to all of its resources, from the tops of the trees to the roots in the earth and to its waters. But they also ask you then to care for it. And I think that is part that people don't listen to, or that's a call to action. So they're saying, you're welcome to our resources, you're welcome to our country, But part of that is accepting the obligation that you then have to care for that country. And so caring for country is not just a responsibility for traditional owners or Aboriginal people, it's everybody's responsibility. And I think it's a really powerful and moving ceremony. And those words, should be sort of heeded by everybody, that it's all about responsibility to care for place.
Awesome. I love that. We've got a question from Linda, who has asked, can some of the panel members share how they maintain their vision and passion for a better world? So I might share the questions around. Vicky, I'm going to come to you for first go at that one.
Well, I have the really amazing opportunity to hear what people are doing when it's, at that point of creation, at that point of invention, of innovation, and knowing that there are people who are so willing to invest their efforts to try to make things better. That inspires me, that there is hope for us because there are people dedicating their lives to it. So that's for me.
I love that. All right, Josh, what about you? What for you maintains that passion and vision?
I don't see any other choice for us going forward. And so it makes me angry when I see other people who are denying the realities of science. So basically for me, it's like, I don't see a way forward for us other than being environmentally sustainable, right? I don't think the planet can take it. And so a lot of that comes from the fact I literally don't see another option for us. And then swinging the other way, it then upsets me when I see people who are happy to, neglect what's in front of them.
Definitely. All right, Maddison, what about you?
Yeah, I think for me, it's from a position of love, like radical love. I love this place. I love country. I love people. I love our cities. And so, everything should be in my life should be about what can I do to return that love, to show that love to country and to the people around me. I think that you can get really, it's really sad and you get a lot of anxiety thinking about the future. And so I try to, bring that back and come from a point of love.
I'm obsessed with radical love. I'm borrowing that as a phrase. That's really cool. And I'm watching Bianca, you nod. I sense agreement, when you think about your business and scaling that up, but also that challenge we mentioned of sort of the model of the fashion industry and how might we see a different sort of approach to the dominant kind of fast fashion way of doing things. What do you think are the barriers to sort of scaling up and seeing this become a more commonplace way of doing business in your industry?
We always think that means one big organization rather than lots of little organizations. So I don't think that there needs to be the big superpowers. I think that the industry needs to get more connected to its roots and that consumers can actually make the biggest choices in that by supporting independent brands, supporting ethical brands, looking at the information, asking for transparency. The big companies, a lot of them have much more resources to be sustainable and they'll have sustainability specialists, but because it's asked for from the consumers, whereas so many little companies I know go to the end and back and have no departments in anything, but just because they feel it and it's that connecting back into the product. So, it's like when you have a conversation with the artist when you're buying the art from them, or you have a conversation to getting back to little retail strip stores rather than big centers, getting into your community. I think that was a beautiful thing that we came out of COVID, knowing the person who bakes the bread at the bakery down the road. All of those are ways that it's not, the scale has been about a breadth of suppliers as opposed to like two big superpowers, which was what you have so much across finance, supermarkets, like there's every oil, like petrol, service stations, Australia's the big duopoly company where two powers own everything. And the only thing that can fight them is lots of strong little people.
And it's a great reframe too, isn't it? I often get frustrated by sort of the state of the business conversation who we listen to because, 80% of Australian businesses are small businesses. And you think about the employment footprint and the supply chain and the decision-making footprint. You're right, it's so significant. We shouldn't be handing over our agency or saying that's above my pay grade or that's someone else's responsibility. We should be absolutely taking that on ourselves. Josh, have you seen that in terms of, Bianca touched on the consumer shift. You've been in business, sort of 11 plus years now. Have you seen a change in decision making? Have you seen people voting with their feet and their dollars?
Yes, unequivocally. Woolies and Coles aren't going to have cage eggs soon. Like that's what's happening. I believe it's 2020. I think Woolies moved up to 2023, and then Coles is still 2025. But these are no longer, cage eggs is no longer a viable industry. Like going forward, they have decided that they're not going to do it anymore, and all the cage eggs that will be sold are going to be sold on the box market, or which is to restaurants and butchers or whatever. So yes, people have very clearly decided that they want free range eggs, and it's something I'm very proud of. And because of course I talk to the category managers who do eggs at Coles and Woolies, and yeah, this is something that is unsurprisingly a really big issue for them to deal with right now, finding the extra supply. But the Australian public and somewhat the industry have very clearly voted with their wallets and have made their stance clear, and I'm tremendously proud of of that achievement.
Absolutely. What a great demonstration of people power, right? Now, crazily, our time is rapidly drawing to a close. I'm going to throw to one more question that I'd love each of you to comment on. And Maddie, I'm going to come to you first on it. Ramina's asked, who do the panelists believe are the sector leaders in each of the respective areas in addressing climate change? I want you to give someone who inspires you, but I'd also love you to add what one thing you'd love people to take away from this conversation and go and do. So someone who inspires you with their leadership in this climate conversation, and one thing you'd love people to go and do after listening.
Cool. Hard question, because there's so many people, and I think what is more inspiring to me is communities of people, but somebody who I think is doing incredible work and great leadership is Uncle Dave Wandon. He's a Wurundjeri elder, and he has been doing incredible work bringing back fire onto country through cultural methods, and so that's about reinvigorating cultural practice on country. Fire is something that Aboriginal people have practiced for tens of thousands of years, and it's something that was taken away. And as a result, we've seen incredible damage to our ecosystems by removing people from nature. We're not separate from nature, we're part of it. And he is somebody that I look up to in his strength and his ability to learn new things and to teach that to the next generation.
I love that. That might be the same part of your answer, but something you'd love people to leave this conversation and go and do.
Oh yeah, go check out Fire Sticks Alliance and go listen to Uncle Dave. To go out to country, take your shoes off if you can, and feel the earth under your feet. Say hello to a tree and say hello to a bird.
I love that. Vicky, I'm going to come to you next. Someone who inspires you and one thing to go and do.
So hard because I hear so many really amazing speakers, but one person who really surprised me was hearing Malcolm Turnbull speak at the Australian Hydrogen Conference earlier this year, and the passion that he spoke with. I mean, as a Prime Minister, maybe he had to be guarded about what he said, but he was just, really letting go and, in his element. So if you ever have the chance to see him speak or hear him speak, really tune in. I would really suggest it. So he's one person that really surprised me and is great for motivating. One thing I would like to ask people to do is, many of these new technologies, such a big part of it is ultimately, whether they fail or whether they succeed, will come from this acceptance by the broader community. You need to, we need to understand that you will accept it around you. So I would say community engagement is such a big part. Find out what you can, ask us questions to, allay any fears, any uncertainties you have, challenge us. Social license to operate, safety, all of those things, challenge us to help make things better for you so that it can be adopted.
I love it. So we've got get dirt under our feet and go ask many, many, many questions, which I love. Great advice. Josh, what are you going to add to the list?
I'd just like to first off, by agreeing with Vicky that, ever since Turnbull has been out of the office, he's an incredibly powerful speaker. That is so seconded. Look, I've got to be honest, regarding my sector, I have been remarkably unimpressed. I've got to be honest. I have found that, I haven't found people who are trying to do what we are at scale. And it has been one of my, I got to be honest, it's one of my biggest disappointments so far, is how we kind of seem to be the largest egg company who are making efforts to genuinely treat the chickens with kindness and not treat the chickens with kindness in a way that looks good on a label. As far as what I think that people should do, the next time you go to the supermarket and buy something, look at the company who produces it, and then find out the company that owns that company. Find the conglomerate, and hey, you know what? See if they have any human rights violations. Look them up, do some research. The food industry thrives on people not doing research. The food industry thrives on people not knowing the 10 different names for corn syrup because it's gone out of style. The food industry is one of the most marketed industries on the planet, and I don't think we're aware of this as people. And the most important thing is for us to be armed with knowledge about what we're putting into our own bodies.
Great addition to our list. Do your research and start making more ethical choices when you get the information from that research. Bianca, do you want to bring us home?
There are two amazing mills. One is Waverley Mills, which is the oldest still running mill it's in Tasmania. They do the most incredible work, and they do everything from using, what I use, dead stock fabric. They use dead stock yarn. They get all the remnants off the floor, like all the little bits, and they turn it into an amazing, beautiful new blanket. Awesome. And I think, we don't make fabric in Australia that much anymore, and they are incredible. MTK is like a knitwear factory fabric. They make all woven knit. Some of their machines are like 100 years old. They're in Melbourne. They're incredible. And again, like their yarn is sold from Balenciaga to, Bianca Spender in Sydney, so they're internationally renowned. They're a small business. It's been all handed through people who care and are passionate about making fabric, because like if we really are to be close to our industries, we actually have to start with the making of the fabric. There are two companies, Arnstorff and ABCH are two companies that are, one is a leader, ABCH Courtney Holmes. She had a Facebook group saying, I need to buy this yarn, like it's a cotton thread, but you can only buy 500 spools. So she created like a Facebook page, and everyone who can't meet the minimum, they all joined. So that all these young designers that could never make an order for 100% cotton thread could finally make an order, which I just thought this idea of pulling people together so that when you don't have the scale, you can still be innovative and you can still lead was amazing. And Arnstorff, she has an incredible, she's B Corp certified. She manufactures all of her clothes in her own factory.
I love your passion for this. I can feel it through the call.
Just people that have just taken it to the next level. And each time I'm like, shit, I'm really not doing enough. Look at these guys, look what they've done. And so those are some incredible companies that I just think are, really pushing the boundaries and making anyone who is even thinking that they're sustainable really think, oh, well, you think that's sustainable? Well, this is sustainable.
Well, look, I want to thank all of our guests. What an incredible conversation we've had. We could have gone for much longer, but I appreciate the extraordinary amount of content and territory that we've covered in a very short period of time. I've learned an extraordinary amount. I hope you all have too. I've also been incredibly inspired. To me, it lights me up to meet leaders like the four individuals we've got on this call today who've made their life's work driving this conversation forward, helping all of us make better choices, enabling those choices with the very, work that they're doing, the research they're pioneering, the businesses that they're running, and the wonderful community engagement they're leading. So please join me in a virtual round of applause to Bianca, to Vicky, to Maddie, and to Josh. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation, and a big thank you to all of you at home for joining us. I hope you took a lot out of it, and we hope to be seeing you at the museum again very soon. Thanks, everyone.
I hope you've enjoyed this insightful and thought-provoking discussion, and we look forward to seeing you in our museums very soon. Thank you.